So I am screen sharing now, and this is where my technical prowess is hopefully going to not let me down. So can you see my screen?
We can see your screen. Yep.
Okay, so then when I go to present, can you see, I go display settings, swap presenter. So can you see the big chunky?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay, so thank you so much. Like I say, really grateful for this time, and I think this has really come about because, like Shirley's just introduced, I am a real advocate for graceful productivity. I'm really aware of the jiggle juggle that we all experience anyway. I've always I've set up tech businesses. I'm an entrepreneur, but I'm also an intrapreneur. As Shirley's just described, I run MediaCom's global consultancy practice. I'm also an author. I run a coaching business, and life is busy. I do have 4 children, and I've often been asked, how do you do it? How do you manage the juggle? And so I've been hosting retreats in businesses like Amazon, Snapchat, and Shirley's come to some of the private ones that I run in my home, which are all around how can we maximize impact without burnout. And yet over the past year, even I have felt myself sliding into a frenetic phase of productivity that I've really started to see as the unspoken crisis of COVID of the past year. And as we start to reintegrate back into whatever the new normal looks like, I really feel that we've got to take conscientious responsibility for how we get back into a really healthy productivity zone, because I think we're really in a dangerous tipping point. And so I wrote an article a few weeks ago, which I just published on LinkedIn, and in its very sort of minuscule way, it's gone viral. My children who are on Snapchat have their own definition of what viral is. But for me, this article stimulated so much response, so many comments, so many shares. And I've had so many people privately say, that describes the pain that I'm in. That is really a true crisis. That is something we need to address. I've been invited now to speak at multiple big tech conferences and to come into organisations like Flash Talking to really talk about how we can combat what I describe as cognitive bounce. And that really is where we're in this realm of constant mental ping pong, where we're bouncing and bouncing and bouncing from task to task. And I believe it's absolutely unsustainable. So over the next hour, I want to describe to you why I see this as a problem. I'm sure you're going to empathise. And then I really want to give you some sensible steps that we can take. And then hopefully if there's time, we can even have a discussion about it. None of us, bearing in mind the industries that we're in, will be surprised that the era that we live in today has been coined the age of acceleration. We all get that technology is transforming lives exponentially. We get it because we're in ad tech, we're in martech, we see it. We look at how marketing has changed. But thinking about us as humans, think about the services that we have available to us, how we live has changed, how we work, how we behave. Everything is different because of the pace of the technological advancements that we're really privileged to experience. Think about us as consumers, and we do think about that all the time with our marketing agendas. We're now very expectant around immediacy. We get what we want when we want it, but we're also way more discerning because we can be. We're not as loyal to brands. There's all these sorts of consumer patterns that have changed and evolved. And in terms of innovation, we are now accepting that there is perpetual change. And I remember at the start of the pandemic, Mark Reed, our WPP CEO, saying that in the first 10 weeks after we went into our first lockdown, we saw what we would generally expect to see in 10 years in terms of innovation. It really started to expose businesses and the brands that didn't have that technological foundational solidity that would enable them to navigate this new world. So there's a lot of change that we're experiencing. And let me just move into the next slide. There's a lot of change that is pretty exponential in terms of right now. There we go. Sorry, I told you I was new at Zoom. So it's exciting because everything is happening faster, bigger, better. And technology, we know, it's evolving at an exponential rate. It's doubling every 2 years. Think about Moore's law. So we've got more processing power, it's cheaper, so great. But we're also really pushing our human potential to the brink. And this is what is really quite dangerous, because we're actually expecting ourselves and each other to keep up with this unrelenting pace. And the reality is that whilst it is really exciting, it's actually really, really hard. And there's a reason for that. And this just blows my mind. But actually, we've still got prehistoric brains, and yet we're trying to operate in this modern world. So neurologically, our brains actually stopped evolving 50,000 years ago. Isn't that a phenomenally shocking statistic? So the neurological structure, the cognitive function, and all the reward systems that our modern brains comprise were actually built for a long, long time ago, and certainly not for today's environment. The prehistoric brain was really seeking food, shelter, and safety continuously, whereas today, we've got food, we've got shelter, we've got safety. This is all here as a given. And actually what our brains are trying to deal with is this constant noise, the constant stimulation, the variety, the endless new tasks, interruptions, demands. Productivity is really, really varied and different. And we're almost accepting of multitasking as a norm, of juggling work, of juggling family. And then actually look at isolation, like we've had in the past year, look at the lack of community as a real contrast to the tribal prehistoric era. And no wonder life feels incredibly hard. We're just not actually designed for all of this pace of modern life. So even before the pandemic hit, it's unsurprising to recognise that for the first time in history, the World Health Organization officially categorised burnout as a global epidemic. And this was in June 2019, because there was real recognition that actually this is a disease of the 21st century, and we need to pay attention to the fact that burnout is now starting to cripple not just economies, but the overall workforce, which then in turn obviously impacts our global economy. So statisticians calculate that the cost of burnout is around $1 trillion per year. And this comes in the form of lost productivity, so mental health disorders from depression to anxiety that then lean into addiction or drugs or alcohol or artificial stimulants. 1 in 4 Brits are likely to fall into a mental health crisis per year. And that statistic is even worse when we look more broadly across Europe. So we're losing an awful lot of productivity. But then also the cost of low engagement, that has a real price of $150 billion per year through absenteeism. And we all know that with the challenge, if someone's unexpectedly off, or our teams sort of start to crumble because people are disengaged or they're ill and they're out of the office. But also in terms of the healthcare toll, that there are estimates, and this comes from the American Society of Stress, that up to 90% of healthcare costs are actually lifestyle based and preventable. So this is all just showing us that actually it's within our gift to make the choices and understand the consequences of how we can maximize our impact without burning out. So let's go back to what happened here in the UK. It was the 16th of March last year. And yeah, things were overwhelming even before the pandemic. And then lockdown happened, and I think there are different dates across Europe, but 16th of March was our big announcement day, where suddenly we lost all our rhythms entirely. All the familiar regulated coping mechanisms that we'd actually put in place for our own successful or not navigation of our modern lives really just started to disappear in an instant. So I'm sure we can all remember where we were in our respective homes and countries when the lockdown news was announced. And that first morning after we realized we were all in lockdown, and we all went into a traditional grief cycle where first of all there came this total shock, and I think we've all talked about the stillness that we experienced, where it just felt the world had literally stopped turning. Skies were quiet, the roads were quiet. I live near a motorway because I've got 4 kids and I need a bigger house and had to be compromised. So I'm near this really noisy motorway, and it was quiet, and it was just amazing, but it felt very surreal. And we were all in shock, absolute shock. And then came real fear, real fear. Oh my God, what does this actually mean? What does this mean for us professionally? What does this mean for us personally? And then we tripped into a level of panic. Now, the frenetic activity that kicked off as we came into that sort of panic mode was understandable, because from an organizational perspective, we were grappling around trying to prove our worth to our clients as we started watching what was happening to businesses and brands that were just suddenly, instantly devoid of customers. Their whole modus operandi had stopped. So we wanted to support them. And I certainly know from a MediaCom perspective, we went into overdrive. We're here, we can help you. What can we do? Okay, you need digital transformation. How? What platform? Let's help, let's help. We became overly customer centric in a great way, because my God, we propelled businesses forward positively. And that was a good corporate agenda. I'm sure, Flash Talking, I'm sure you were doing the same. It was, how can we support each other? How can we support these businesses? From a personal perspective, we also then started watching businesses contract. We started seeing redundancies happening, and that's really scary. I'm a single mother of 4 kids, and I started to panic. Oh my God, if I lose my job, everything is destabilized. So then there became a personal agenda of prove it's okay, I'm at home, but I'm still working really well. Reassure the team, reassure the bosses, reassure everyone that we can be high contributors. And we all started doing that because we were in a panic and a fear state. And that is understandable. The challenge is that that has continued. And there's an expectation from organizations, or there has been, and almost a normality of ourselves to keep inputting at that level of pace. And it is just not sustainable. So I just want to refer back to a law. Yerkes and Dodson, 2 scientists, and back in the 1900s, 1908 actually, they identified that there's a scale that really depicts what healthy productivity looks like, because there is a correlation between stimulation and activity, stimulation and our output. And when we are at a point of healthy stress, it's really good for us. And it does actually stimulate us to perform and to deliver at a really good, healthy point. So when stress gets to that sort of mid-level of that bottom line, we're at a point where we're a bit excited. So imagine that sort of the feeling that you have, the anticipation if you're about to go on a roller coaster or you're about to go on your first date, and you got that little tingle of, okay, yeah, bit of excitement. It's a good stress. It's a good feeling. And that actually stimulates us to be our best, to bring our best self forward and to output at a healthy pace. But there really is a tipping point. And when you see the top of that curve where you've hit your peak performance, but actually there's a continuing stress and you're continually being pushed and pushed and pushed, then you start to fall into a level that is dangerous, because you've got continuous stress surging that starts to impact our mental ability and then eventually depletes us down to a level of physical impact. So we have to take real responsibility of our bio-individuality, because each one of us is going to have a different peak performance element. I think I can tolerate a lot of stress. I think I get a kick out of it. It's probably just me. That's who I am. But if I look at my mother, she'd probably be very different on that curve. So you need to understand yourself and really have that deep self-awareness of what is healthy for you and what is manageable long term, so that you never slide down and cascade into that burnout zone. When we do get into a state of multitasking, which is really where I see what a lot of us are doing now, juggling home and juggling work and delivering this frenetic mental ping pong, in a multitasking zone, you're triggering the hormone cortisol and you're simultaneously triggering adrenaline. So you're in a fight or flight mode. Now, when you have the two of those aspects surging simultaneously, it creates mental fog and it really starts to create quite a scrambled thinking. What's interesting is that multitasking actually creates a bit of a dopamine addiction feedback loop. So where we start searching for external stimulation, we get a reward from when there has been a stimulation. And so then that starts giving us this weird novelty bias of, okay, well, I'll just check that email, look at my phone, and then we start getting this weird sort of candy opioid type sensation of yay, 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 because we're being stimulated constantly by little micro moments. But actually that's really damaging, and a lack of focus really does hinder good and healthy productivity. So we need to be really aware of excessive productivity, what it's doing to our bodies, and sometimes how excessive productivity can actually be not only creating emotional anxiety, but perhaps masking emotional anxiety. So did we all step into this frenetic pace of output at the beginning of the pandemic that we've sustained because we were fearful of our jobs? So did that happen? Did we create a habit that actually we now need to uncreate? Probably, is what I would say. It's not all doom or gloom. I'm 100% an advocate for the efficiency and the effectiveness that actually has been born from our remote working lives. I mean, I run a global team of my pillar leads, my consulting, each business division. I've got one lead in Singapore, I've got one in New York, I've got one in the Netherlands, one in London. We have come together in such a tight team. It's been fantastic, and I'm sure you felt exactly the same, that actually productivity and connectivity between the teams has indeed made it feel like it's a global village. Having access to all the market CEOs. I mean, I've launched the Blink Consulting Business Division in 30 markets since December now. So we're live, we're up and running in 30 markets. Imagine that as an agenda in a normal year. That would have been my year, flying to 30 different markets, meeting the excos, setting up the business division. And I've managed to do that in Q1 because of the remote working. After I published my article, I had an email from a man who said that he used to task himself with around 10 sales meetings a week. And actually he was finding that now, throughout the pandemic, he was actually achieving sometimes 10 sales meetings per day. And great, loved it. He was having all this great commission and it felt really wonderful, but it's unsustainable. The other benefit has actually been around intimacy and rapport. I'm sure you felt this, but actually seeing each other's children and bedrooms and, you know, coming together in these really unique environments has actually helped us develop rapport and deepen connections. So listen, you know, there are good things about remote working, and the new normal is going to be interesting, where we do get this sort of balance of blending home and going out and commuting. But the danger is the bounce, bounce. And this is around this perpetual meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting with just one click as the transition. So I'll give you a very quick overview of one Thursday afternoon. This is what I talked about in my article. I delivered a 2-hour global conference presenting Blink Digital Transformation Consultancy to several hundred excos across our top markets. 2 hours I talked. At the end of that conference, click, I closed that Teams link, I opened the new Teams invite to do a panel for International Women's Day, where I met some other authors and we were filmed and had an hour doing this panel. The end of that, click, open the next meeting. I was doing KPI session settings with my team. End of that, click, college tutor for my daughter. End of that one, click, French CEO, click, on, bounce, relentlessly. And this is how we have started working and accepted that this is okay to look at a calendar in the morning and just see no gaps and just this endless stream, because we think we're really efficient. And that's what we've been doing since we started remote working. But actually, it's a crisis. I absolutely see it as a crisis. We are suffering from this mental ping pong for some of the reasons I'll go through in a minute. What is crazy about that schedule that I've just described is that it happens from the same chair, in the same room, on the same screen, in one long stream with just seconds as transitions. And we used to have barriers. We used to have barriers between work and home. Yes, there was the commute, but even in the office, there would be breaks between meetings. Someone would go and do a coffee run. We'd get cabs. we'd have travel time to pause, to reflect. And if we were talking about a global conference, we would focus on that singly. It would be the whole focus rather than that conference that I delivered being just wedged into the rest of a 10-hour day of meetings. So life really critically has absolutely lost its boundaries. And, you know, whether you've got kids or not, whether you've got a demanding global job or not, whether you've got a steady 9-to-5, what has happened is that we've just lulled ourselves into this endless stream of just continuously filling our diaries. And just think about if it was a global conference or a pitch, say we're doing a global conference, I probably would have flown to another country, probably would have had a couple of days of meeting the co-presenters, of rehearsing, of singly focusing on that event. On the day, we'd have delivered the keynote, we'd have then had networking drinks afterwards, we'd probably have had a co-presenter dinner. On the next day, I'd probably have flown home and answered all the Q&As. That would have been my week. And that would have given me a chance to really focus and to then decompress. And actually that's gone because I just do that in the middle of another working day. And it's really, really unhealthy. So we need to take control for bringing breaks into our days, into our lives. Biologically, it's absolutely imperative that we rest our brains to be able to contribute intelligently and impactfully. So there's loads and loads of research that scientists have done that proves that the benefit of naps, the benefits of meditation, of having nature walks. So when the scientists have studied the habits of exceptional artists and athletes, it's really shown how mental breaks actually really replenish attention. And bizarrely, having those breaks, not only do you replenish your attention, but you actually by default then increase your productivity. So actually stepping away from this maelstrom of meetings and then reclaiming that perspective of yourself and the business agendas by stepping away is actually the only way to maintain effectiveness. And it's something that we've lost sight of. And so it's really up to us now to take control of how we create that space, to digest what is going on, to decompress and just recalibrate ourselves, and then prepare for what's coming next, which is to breathe. So all this darting around of our brains is just really taking a cognitive toll on us. Now, there's a hack you can use before I get into the brain burden of darting, that if you have been really engrossed in one particular task and you're starting to feel exhausted and you feel yourself getting tired, you can do a little brain hack where you flip to an entirely different task. So say you've been doing something that's very analytical, you've been really working on accounts and you just feel yourself getting tired, that side of your brain is actually feeling drained. If you then flip and do something really creative, like start writing some copy or some comms, that actually shifting from an analytical, logic-based task into something creative actually fires a different side of the brain. And it starts resting the logic side of the brain as it stimulates the creative side of the brain. And that actually can be really rejuvenating. So that is a brain hack that we can use. But that is nothing that works when we're talking about darting. The darting is it's just a constant flit from this to that, from this to that, from this to that, and it's unsustainable because the constancy of the trip, change actually starts to create this real mental burden because it's happening too quickly and too fast. This isn't just one flit across the day. This is just every meeting, potentially every 30 minutes. So we start to get this really drained cognitive burden. We feel physically exhausted. We get really fuzzy thinking, and actually this starts to impact our decision making. We're not as effective because we're tired, and we might start to find ourselves quite overwhelmed by minutiae. And I don't know if you've noticed this in yourselves, where you start to feel the anxiety because you haven't paused and you haven't taken a breath. That actually, as your stress hormones are surging, it really starts to exaggerate the importance of the non-essential. So you'll get really fixated on one thing unnecessarily. And this is all because you're in this ever spiraling cortisol fueled panicky responses that are triggered because of the brain darting. So not only is it dangerous because of the darting, but think about the nuances that every single meeting requires. Now, it's not just about the fact that we're seeing, it's not the fact that we're jolting, that it's just the jolt. It's actually the fact that we need really different levels of empathy, of technical prowess. From meeting to meeting, every interaction requires a different version of our own brains. I won't say a different version of ourselves, because hopefully we're all our authentic selves, but how you interact in different dynamics is going to be really different. So if I'm presenting a keynote, I'm going to be this person. If I'm doing KPI setting, I'm going to be nurturing me. If I'm talking to my daughter's college tutor, I'm going to be someone else. If I'm in a Group M services holding company meeting, I'm going to be someone else. So we're constantly adapting our own selves based on those socio-cultural nuances necessary for the different meeting environments that we're going into. And add this into the fact that we're not having breaks between the meetings, that mental ping pong becomes even more of a strain and a drain. And I'm sure you've all read the articles around the impact of the video meetings and how hard it is to read the visual cues, how much harder it is to actually focus on a screen outside of actually being in a physical setting. It really takes very different interrelational input. So we are drained every which way, and it's incredibly challenging. So statistics have proved that on average across the UK, US and Canada, we are logging onto our corporate VPNs around 11 to 13 hours a day, average. That's what we're doing now. So yes, on the one hand, we're 40% more productive, but we are all working 2 to 3 hours more than we did pre-pandemic. So it's statistically proven we are working more, and it's hurting us, it's hurting ourselves. And as we think about our organizations moving forward, as we think about ourselves avoiding burnout and hitting this new crisis, we have to really respect that life is about choices and consequences, and it sits within our gift to actually decide how we're going to manage this crisis of the cognitive bounce. Now, we all make around 35,000 decisions a day, and 90% of those decisions are unconscious. But my provocation to you now is to say, what decisions do you want to take? What choices do you conscientiously want to make to create control and order in your life and yourself that really halts the cognitive bounce crisis? And that's what I'm going to go through now, 8 steps that I've taken and I'm encouraging my teams to take, and I'd love to hear your feedback and thoughts on it, to combat this new crisis. Now, wherever you sit in the organisation, wherever you sit in life, you have custody over your time, and this is absolute fact. And as a contributor to the world, it's really up to you to prioritise what is going to have the most impact against what matters most. So, and think about by when. So I start each day, I have my little notepad here, and I start each day and I write with a pen what matters most. And I think about what are the key outputs that I need to deliver each day. I strategically prioritise to a point where I organise my life in such a way where I'm clear of what my work goals are, my corporate MediaCom goals are, my private business goals, so the businesses that I run, what are they for my children? What am I trying to achieve? What matters most for them? I'm writing another book. How do I fit that in? I strategically prioritise what I'm going to deliver by when, and I've designed it all in a lovely spreadsheet. And if you want it, I can share a template PDF for what that looks like, because it's a planner. It's a planner, and that doesn't sound like rocket science, but it is so essential that we take control of what really does matter. And within our organisations, we don't have to deliver against this pace as long as we have managed our colleagues and our leaders' expectations accordingly. So do the work to strategically prioritise and then get stakeholder alignment. So all of the planning in the world only actually becomes viable and valuable when it's lifted off your private Excel into a full stakeholder aligned strategy and a set of really solid actions. So when I really started realizing that this is unsustainable, I can't do 15, 16 hours a day anymore. As much as I love my work, it's really harming me. So I've done a real revamp of the strategic priorities for my business division within MediaCom. And I've sat down with the global CEO and the global COO and said, these are my priorities and this is my roadmap. And I'm going to do that this year. And it's slower than the ambitious bit of me that wants to do it all right now. It's slower, but it's realistic. It's realistic for my team. It's realistic for me. And you know what? I presented it to them and they were like, great, wow, amazing. There was no, so I think we need to take control of ourselves. What does matter most to your team, to you in terms of output, and then manage expectations. Always remember that disappointment only comes when expectations have been mismanaged. So really design what your cognitive bounce mitigation plan looks like. Really think about what a realistic pace is, then engage your relevant stakeholders to get agreement, and then share it outwards. Make it known that this is what you're doing. So my strategic roadmap for Blink, I've shared it vertically and horizontally, and everyone's clear of what I intend to do this year and at what pace. But this extends to your home life too. If you've got children or your partner, just really talk about how you can create space and balance, because it's so important. Once everybody understands what's expected of whom by when, it all just becomes a lot more manageable. Now, rejuvenate with energizing passion projects. This is something that you might think, well, that goes against everything you're just describing, Bianca, because you're saying that we need to slow down. And actually, no, this comes back to prioritizing what really matters. It's well recognized that we are healthier, we're more productive, and we're calmer when we are creative. And everyone is creative, and I won't, whatever they said to you at school, you're academic or you're creative, you know, that's wrong. We're all innately creative. It's about finding the passion projects that matter to us, that ignite us, that bring us to life, that are energizing, and finding the time to build them into our weeks. Because this really matters about keeping us feel connected to what is meaningful. And this is actually a way to actually stimulate more energy in ourselves. So like I'm a writer, so I like to find time actually in the evenings to write. And that's my preference, but I feel great. I sleep better if I've had an hour of writing in the evening. It might be cooking, it might be a YouTube channel you're on, whatever it might be, gardening, you know, any passion project that is totally detached from your day-to-day work. It's so important to build that into your life and factor it into your schedule, so it doesn't then become a hobby of yesteryear. And you know, this really isn't about setting up another business and trying to get more income or status or public accolades. This is nothing to do with the extrinsic stuff. This is about your intrinsic well-being, because when you're doing work that really energizes you because you're passionate about it, that naturally gets you feeling upbeat. It increases your overall self-esteem, and then it makes you more motivated to contribute in life generally. And my God, I think we've all struggled with how to stay motivated in the past year. This has been hard. You know, who wants to get out of bed and just come and sit down at the same chair and in the same screen? And, you know, if you've got your life injected with the passion stuff, you're much more likely to skip out of bed and do it. So, step 4, this is such an easy one, and we've just rolled this out now as the norm across the whole of the global business. So just cut meeting invites down by 15 minutes. It's just such an easy thing to do, but also work through the races before you even actually set the meeting up. Really think about who needs to be in that meeting, what their contribution is, and if you're invited to a meeting, that could potentially be non-essential. Verify from the person that sent that meeting invite why you're being invited, what your contribution is. Could it be done with an email and not you have that hour or 45 minutes, whatever it might be. Just be really conscious of other people's time and your own time. So, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was all about, you know, we needed to connect and almost coddle each other with the reassurance that we're all connected and it's okay. And that absolutely still matters. That connection matters and the community matters, but we don't necessarily still need to do 30 minutes every single morning just to check in. Really start to preserve time and think strategically about how to plan your meetings. And then massive one for me, like framing big meetings with space either side. It's such a logical thing to do, but I certainly didn't do it when I had that global conference the other day. And I've been, I admit it, really excited by the efficiency, a bit like that salesperson that could fit 10 meetings in a day. It's really exciting when we love our work and there's potential gain. Lean in, but actually no, because at the end of the day, you're exhausted and we need to take responsibility for creating those gaps. So next time I do a big conference, I will make sure that I have an hour before, an hour after. Maybe I'll even plan to just have the afternoon with no meetings and just thinking time, plan in the decompression time. So just really think about that, build it in advance and just preserve it. And it's up to you to really preserve that time as sacred. Don't let people hijack your diary if you can. And then plan hard stops and honor them. And this is just something that, again, we are really bad at. Just, I've noticed everyone's bad at things drift, especially if we're in global roles. And New York doesn't wake up till the afternoon. And so I'll find my evenings, or I have found my evenings filled with meetings. And actually now I'm really being rigorous. I'm finishing and I'm having tea with my kids. And then we're going to go on the trampoline in the garden, and that is it. And I'm really sticking to that. And I'm having to force myself to stick to it, but it really is important. And I think we need to take real awareness of the fact that work is always going to be there for us. Look at the retirement ages increasing and increasing. There's always going to be an abundance of work. There's always going to be so much to do. And the work will still be there tomorrow morning, next week, in 10 years. There's always going to be work to do. But right now, we've got to just preserve our own time and our own space. So put those hard stops in your diary and then honor them. And I think as leaders in our organizations, we really have to take collective responsibility for this crisis, for this period that we're in. And step one really is just taking this, having this awareness, but we need to talk about this. Shirley, it's brilliant you've invited me in to come and talk to everyone about this today. I think just having this consciousness about the fact that we have lulled into habitual productivity that's harmful is really important, that we're aware of it. That is the most important step, but now we need to lead by example. So really look at your teams, look at how they're operating, and look at how you can recommend that they potentially slow down. We can't now let ourselves slide into a massive burnout crisis as we come out of the pandemic crisis, and it's up to us to just take collective responsibility to protect each other as we positively now surge back into balance. And then finally, just to sort of something that I've found really helps me is to start clustering focus. So if you run your own team, your own business division, is there a chunk of time across the week where you can organize it as sacred and cluster your work into pockets of similar themes, so it becomes a moment of focus? So whether it's, I'll have a Friday morning, what I call it my sacred thinking time, which is really where I just catch up with all the outputs from the meetings I've had across the week to then actually deliver my output, to write my decks, thought pieces, or whatever it might be. So I always know I've got that space on Friday morning. But equally on Friday afternoon, I try and do sort of people stuff. So it's connecting in with the team. So I'm in that zone of the nurturing, of the how are you progressing against your goals. So it's sort of a similar theme. So again, it's lessening that cognitive burden on my brain overall. So think about, could you do that, and how can you build that time in? The end is definitely nigh. And I know that speaking to colleagues in other countries, some offices are opening up, and so having the geographical boundary between home and office is starting to regulate some of those crazy statistics around 11 to 13 hours a day on the BPM. That's starting to diminish already. And we're starting to plan our reintegration back into the offices within WPP. But I think really just focus on the fact that when you are multitasking, it really is detrimental to cognitive performance. So if you're trying to concentrate on a task, and there's been scientists have done studies, if you're trying to concentrate on a task, but your phone is there distracting you, or you open an email, it's actually been proven that your IQ depletes by 10 points if you're distracted. So it is fact that multitasking is actually detrimental, and we need to be really aware of that and just try and stop it. I feel that we really are in this moment where, as leaders, we need to be the ones that are taking the exemplary strides now to stamp out all of this mayhem, because we are about to enter this new anthropological era. We don't yet know what the new normal is going to look like. And we really need to think about how we start to infuse our business cultures with this new post-pandemic recognition of what is harmful and what is healthy. So it really is something that I believe managing cognitive bounce is absolutely a critical consideration for thriving, flourishing workforces and workplaces. So I'd really like to leave you with the thought of what steps are you going to take today for yourself and for your colleagues. And I want to say thank you very much for your time and for inviting me in today. I'm really happy and honoured that you've listened and hopefully learned. And thank you. Yeah, that is it.
Oh, thank you, Bianca. That was honestly absolutely brilliant. I can honestly say I relate so much of what you were saying. Toby was messaging me at a certain time. He's like, sounds just like you. But no, like things like what you were saying where, you know, when you're overthinking things, where you're just so busy and you're going from one to another and you're doing something really, really simple and you overthink it and it takes so much longer. And I definitely think not having that break in between, whereas we jump in taxis or just chatting, it does really affect you. And it doesn't matter how many times you say, I'm going to have a break today, you don't. It is so important. Yeah, no, and I thought that was great. I don't know what everybody else thought.
I thought that was brilliant, really good, really good. But I think it's going to be really interesting seeing as you said, Bianca, going back to like the new normal, whatever that happens to be.
Yeah,
I think that's going to be almost as big a shock as when we went in. My experience of I equate it to my experience of living abroad a couple of times. It was kind of easier going and living abroad and being there than it was to come back in a lot of ways. And I think there'll be some parallels between that experience and what we'll probably go through when everyone starts going back to the office and commuting and being with people all the time. It's going to be as big a shock, I think, if not bigger.
Yeah, I think you're right. What is the flash talking plan? Have you started even sort of looking at what reintegration looks like? Not yet.
So yeah, we've been looking at it. I mean, our stance really is until the government says, you know, they're advising people to go back to the office, we're not going to do anything. We do want to open up the offices as soon as we can, because to your point, everyone's in a very different situation. So for some people, they can work from home quite happily, effectively. For others, that's really not so easy for a plethora of reasons. We just want to make sure we're catering for both. I think from my personal point of view, the hardest part about going back is, or one of the hard things about going back is going to be the communication as to who's doing what, when and where.
Yeah.
Because we're definitely going to be much more flexible. Working from home is definitely going to be a solid part of what everyone does. But with that has to be a change in how we communicate where anyone is going to be. And that, I think, is again going to be a challenge that I certainly don't feel I've got to grips with yet. Yeah,
and I think that's fair enough. And I think we're all making it up as we go along, aren't we? We're just trying to do what's best. So yeah, I totally understand. My eldest son, he's 18, and he joined MediaCom in November as a digital apprentice. And so his experience, he's gone from college, having not been allowed to do his A-levels, to come straight into the working environment, having never actually met anyone face to face, living in his bedroom with his girlfriend, and just sitting, going from his bed to his computer. And he's got, you know, he can't wait to get into an office and actually meet people and learn about being an adult in the workplace, and learn about, you know, and for a lot of us, we've all got that context. We know what it was like in the office, but for the new starters, they've got none of that context. So they're the ones that I feel that we have to protect, don't we? Get them back into the offices.
Yeah.
I have a question, I guess, Bianca. Hi, Toby.
Nice to
Obviously,
meet
I work across Group M, so this is probably a slightly MediaCom-y style question. But obviously, Simon's mentioned about Flash Talkings go back to the office, and I'm sure MediaCom, Group M are doing the same sort of thing. Chelsea, Shirley, and myself and Sophie work in very client-facing roles, where obviously going into the offices of our partners or clients makes sense. So
yeah.
do you think that will change much from a Group M perspective? Have you seen anything?
Well,
Because I'm speaking to people, obviously they've said we probably won't have external vendors in for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it was quite interesting when we had the gap last summer and we were allowed to open the office and have a limited workforce in the office. Some of the Mars, the global Mars team, were going into the office to just have the camaraderie, be in the office. And the invitation was there for the clients. Clients were not going to be allowed to come into the office, but we could have met outside or in a restaurant, or I can't remember what the rules were. But Mars had a blanket rule: no, everyone is working from home. So they had stipulated it as their corporate agenda. So we were sort of inviting it, but then the client said no. So I think it's going to be really unique. It's going to depend on the client. It's going to depend on the business. And, you know, we really don't have the answers yet. You know, you're right to raise it. But yeah, I don't know. Because, I mean, I was with Nick Lawson and Josh and Matt Nee last week. We did a sort of vendor showcase of our new positioning, because Nick Lawson's taken over as our CEO from Steve Allen. So we've got new positioning, seeing the bigger picture. So we had a sort of a session, a sort of show and tell. And it was quite strange being with a group of vendors that normally we'd be in the pub with.
Yeah.
And it was incredibly efficient because we got to share the message en masse, and so that was useful. But it's not the same, where relationships are so important, and we all miss it, don't we? We miss it. We miss it. That's not the same.
Sorry.
I was just going to ask another kind of the other side of the coin, if you like. So I am based up north, so I'm kind of the only one who was supposed to work, so used to working remotely and based.
Oh wow!
And like, obviously, I was traveling to like Manchester and Leeds and so the kind of the positive thing for me from the pandemic has been that, like, more than ever, I'm closer to the team than I ever was before, because like everyone's online, everyone's there, we chit chat online, so I suddenly know, you know, I know everything that's going on, whereas
Amazing.
like 2 years ago I'd be like a bit more on so I just been thinking about how can I like maintain this kind of level of or like trying to like cling on to the kind of the positive sides of everyone being more remotely. So I don't know if you had any kind of ideas or tips for me, like, or.
Well, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because would you then almost start to have a bit of FOMO of when the teams are getting together physically? And, and I understand that, but I think, you know, that all the conjecture is that it's going to be pretty much three if not 4 days working from home as the norm anyway. So I imagine you're still going to maintain that level of intimacy, because the video world is not going to go away. It is efficient. It actually is efficient. But it's interesting if actually it does stimulate you to want to go to an office and to go down to London, and whether, you know, imagine if that starts happening.
I absolutely can't wait to do that, definitely.
We'll just live stream you into everything, Sophie. We'll just have a giant cardboard cutout of you that we take around everywhere.
But yeah, no, thank you so much. That was
oh, good.
really good.
Thank you. No, it's nice. It's good to talk about it. It is good to talk about it. And yeah, I hope that we can all just find this level of balance and get back to normal. I can't wait to see you all again and just who's bored? It's so boring, isn't it?
Yeah, everyone is looking forward to this new normal, or something that sounds like normal. In Italy, the situation is still really problematic, so nothing is normal at this stage. But it's balance. It's definitely needed with this new normal.
Yeah,
fingers crossed.
Exactly. Well, we're tribal, aren't we? We need our connection, and we want to feel like we belong, and yeah. It's definitely challenging. Well, thank you so much, everybody, and thank you, Shirley.
Yeah, no, thank you. Honestly, that was brilliant. I think we all needed that, and it's nice that we've done it just before we broke up for Easter. But no, that was absolutely brilliant, and hopefully we can reflect and think about it. And I know I'm certainly going to make some changes next week. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
me
thank
too.
you. It's a fresh breath.
It's nice just getting everyone together and just talking about it, just not a normal typical Zoom that we've been doing. So no, it's brilliant, really refreshing.
Good. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy the long weekend.
Thank you. You too. And thanks again. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.